Já estamos em ligação com várias partes do mundo. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening to our honorable guests from the Azores, because it is dark already in the Azores, but it is just about 12 o'clock noon here at Pacific Standard Time. And good afternoon to those in the East Coast of the United States, as it is just about 3 o'clock there. We are very honored to continue in these presentations that we've decided to do kind of on a weekly basis. Here we have basically done one every week since the semester has begun. So we're kind of overachievers in that aspect, but we'll see if we can continue with them with once every single week until May of this year, when our semester ends, our spring semester at Fresno State. So these are our lectures, part of the PBBI-FLAD Spring 2021 speaker series. We are very honored with today's presentation and delighted. And let me just take you a few minutes to introduce our guests. I have his CV here, his curriculum, and we've allotted an hour for this. If I was going to read every single thing, it would take about 54 minutes and a half, and I'd have to do it at a pretty fast pace. So Professor Carlos Eduardo Pacheco Amaral is a professor with the University of the Azores, and we are glad to, we're very honored to have him here, not just glad, but honored to have him here. He actually has a very peculiar route to the Azores, as far as he's an Azorean from the island of San Miguel. But he did his licenciatura, his bachelor's degree, and his master's here in the United States of America. And that's one of the reasons why you'll see, probably not the only one, but one of the reasons that he speaks perfect English. He was here, he did his bachelor's at Amherst College, very prestigious, as all of you know, in the East Coast, and his master's at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And then he has his PhD from the University of the Azores. He has done tremendous work in the Azores. He's been involved in various aspects. And again, I'm not going to take too much time. We are very delighted that he's here, and we want to go directly to the presentation. But right now, besides being, of course, at the University of the Azores, as you can see there, the Jean Monnet chair at the University of the Azores, he is also at this time just recently appointed. It's been a couple of months, a little bit more than a couple of months now, the Regional Director for European Affairs and External Cooperation. And he can tell you a little bit about that itself as well. And we're very happy to have him at this prestigious a place in the government of the Azores, directly working with the president of the government and the entire government, because Professor Amaral has experience in, of course, external affairs. He has experience in European affairs, and he has to us what's something dear to all of our hearts, those of us who are following along here in the United States of America. He has very, very strong connection to the Azorean communities and the Azorean diaspora. Connections from a family, connections from education, connections from living in Massachusetts, and so it's always pleasing to have someone with his expertise that has that strong connection with the Azorean diaspora. Professor Carlos Amaral, thank you so much for taking time to do this for us. We appreciate it very much at Fresno State, and you have to promise something right before you even begin the presentation, and that is, as soon as the pandemic is over, you need to be here, probably not until spring of 2022, but it'll go by fast, to do a live presentation at Fresno State. So hopefully you'll be able to accept our invitation.
Well, thank you very much, Denise, for your very, very kind words that come directly from the heart. And I appreciate it. It is my privilege, it's my pleasure to be with you. Unfortunately, only online, and please keep in mind that my wife tells me that I am like a child. With children, one should never promise what one cannot fulfill, because children have a very peculiar aspect, memory. They do not forget, and they will remind you. In Portuguese, we'd say, eles vão cobrar, eles cobram-nos. They will ask for it. And so do not promise what you
It is not. It's a
do
commitment and a promise. Only if I'm not around. You are already invited here amongst the public, following us on various platforms to be one of our speakers for the spring of 2022. If time permits that we can travel at that time, and we hope that we do.
Directly, my dear friend. I will not go to Fresno. I will not go to the United States and work with you only if that is outright impossible, because it is a second fatherland to me. I want to go to my presentation, but quite a few years ago, in an international event, before it started, people were presenting themselves, and I presented myself as Portuguese, of course, but also half American, or somewhat American. And I immediately heard two voices in my back. We, on the other hand, are 100% Portuguese. But that's what it is, and reality as it is. And I thank Dinesh for this opportunity. I will try to fulfill the task that was entrusted to me, and to do so, I resorted to a PowerPoint that I prepared for this occasion, and this conference will be in telegraphic form. It will be strictly telegraphic, and you will see immediately afterwards why I'm saying this. It is telegraphic because the breadth of the theme that was proposed to me does not allow for more, and it is telegraphic because I also hope that maybe with it, it will raise some interest and the opportunity to take me back to where I feel at home as well, to the United States, to you. The Azores and the European Union, I will try to talk to you about Portugal, the Azores, and the European Union, which is a bit like, as António Nobre would put it, as a major Portuguese poet, talking about myself, talking about ours, to talk about myself, to talk about ourselves. Portugal is Portugal is not a rectangular state. What is Portugal? Portugal is not a rectangular state. Portugal is a triangular state. And this is my first notion that the first telegraph that I would propose to you, that I am part of a country that is the form of a triangle, the triangle that you can see on the map. And that Portugal is not a continental state. Portugal is an oceanic, a maritime state. And that is why we in the Azores, that is why the archipelago of Madeira are Portuguese. They are Portuguese because they were given shape and form by Portugal 500 years ago, when Portugal was a superpower, and because of the direct services that these archipelagos were able to render to Portugal in this adventure. It is perhaps hard to think of this way at present, but Portugal used to be a superpower, a major maritime power, and that is why it was at this time that we became Portuguese. And from that day on, the very destinies of Portugal, of the Azores, and of Madeira, of these two Atlantic islands, became intimately connected to the dominant maritime power of the time. First Portugal, then England, now the United States. And that is why these islands became Portuguese, because of the direct services they were able to render to the Portuguese state, and afterwards because of the rental, the way that the Portugal was able to rent them to the dominant maritime power. First Britain, and then the United States. And this is what explains that Great Britain, and now the United States is more than an ally to the Azores, is more than an ally to Portugal as a whole, but to these islands, to these islands in particular, insofar as they are somewhat an extension of our very being. For those who do not know, this is where we are, at the point where three continental plates join: the African plate, the Eurasian plate, the North American plate, forming what is called the microplate, the microplate of the Azores. And as you can see, actually 2 of our islands are American, laying on the American plate, the islands of Corfu and of Flores. Another slide of the microplate of the Azores. Portugal is the sea. This slide proposes. And this is the official notion. When you talk about the borders of Portugal, Portugal is a country that has one border, Spain. That's false. Portugal has a plurality of borders because Portugal prolongs itself westwards into the Atlantic, and prolonging itself westwards into the Atlantic, Portugal, because of the Azores, has a border up north to Iceland, borders the United States and Canada, borders the Caribbean, borders Africa. Portugal is the ocean, because without the ocean, meaning without these 2 archipelagos of the Azores and Madeira, strictly in its continental shape, Portugal is but the size of a Spanish autonomous community, one of the Spanish autonomous community. It is the islands, it is these archipelagos, which one of our major intellectuals, Vitorino Nemésio, once called the quintessence of Portugal. It is with these islands, from these islands, that issues the raison d'être, so to speak, of the contemporary Portugal. The islands, just very briefly, 3 clusters of 9 islands stretching in western, northwestern, eastern, southeastern direction. Very little length, 2,000, a little over 2,000 square kilometers of land, a lot of water. 938,000 square kilometers of water, of exclusive economic zone and of the deep sea bed, as well as of the resources contained in that it contains. The islands, broad overview, originally they were the property of the prince. These islands were settled by the prince, giving them either entire islands of parts of islands to his donees, to their captains, to settle. Imagine, would you care for an island? Would you care for half an island? Oh, here it is. All you have to do is occupy it, take a couple of families, preach the gospel of spreading and multiplying, and occupy them. The islands, the islands first became the private property of the donees and of the respective captains, and then Portugal as a unitary state, everything, all political life was controlled by Lisbon. It dates to the end of the 18th century, the first reivindications for autonomy. Today, the Azores is an autonomous region of Portugal, a politically autonomous region of Portugal, something that for Europeans is complicated, hard to understand. For Americans, it's because of the federal structure of the state is quite simple, and so I will not go into detail on this. But the notion was that for when Portugal was a superpower, when Portugal's interests in the island, Portugal had interest in the island for the effective implementation of its navigation, Portuguese policy was effective in the islands. Portugal cared about the islands and acted upon the islands. From the 16th century, from the 17th century onwards, the islands were left pretty much to oblivion, to their own resources. Thus, the demands for political autonomy. The demands for autonomy that were first addressed in 1895 in the 19th century with the decentralization of the autonomous districts, the three, if you remember in the map that presented earlier, organized in 3 clusters of each of these 3 clusters. Then following the 1974 revolution, and the democratization of the state, political autonomy. And political autonomy meant simply the sharing of political power, the taking of political power on those issues that are of the direct interest of the islands from Lisbon and bringing them into the islands themselves, including, and this was a very important conquest of the time at the level of international relations. The 1975 Portuguese Constitution defining the autonomous region, the autonomous regime for the islands, recognizes to the islands the right of access to international relations on those issues that are of their interest. Thus, the existence of my very post of Regional Director for European Affairs and External Cooperation of the regional government of the Azores, because traditionally for unitary states, foreign affairs is the prerogative of the state and of the state alone. Following the 1974 revolution, political power was somewhat carved from Lisbon and brought to the islands themselves. Portugal, we like to think big, and we like to think very well of ourselves. Portugal, not a small country, a large country, a country on its way to 4 million square kilometers. This is the map. This, as you can see, to the left, to my left, it is Canada and the United States. Portugal is not a small country, it's a huge country. Portugal is not a poor country. Portugal is one of the richest countries of the EU, of the European Union. Why? Because of its ocean, because of the sea. Europe, we need to have memory. Europe used to be the world, because Europe, from modernity up until the 20th century, up until the 2 world wars of the 20th century, Europe was the world because Europe dominated the world. We may have a hard time understanding Portugal as a big country. We may have a hard time understanding the Netherlands as a big country. Well, this used to be the map of the Netherlands, not just the little territory in Europe that is now the Netherlands. What you see in pink is the Netherlands. What you see in red was once Great Britain. What you see in blue was once France. What you see here is a map of yesterday's Europe. Yesterday's Europe to yesterday's Europe escaped pretty much what? China. And even China. And even China did not lack its moments of humiliation at the hands of Europe. Well, my point is that what Europe did to the world throughout modernity, carving it amongst itself, not just Africa. And remember that even as late as the end of the 19th century, Europeans were able to take the map of Africa, put it on the table and carve it amongst themselves as if it were their own backyard. Well, Europe, that throughout modernity, the same Europe that yesterday did this, today in the 20th century was itself carved. And this is, and saw itself carved between the two real winners of the Second World War, the United States and Russia and the Soviet Union. And integration, European integration, motivated from the start from the United States, because these two superpowers that carved Europe in half had different motives and had different intents upon Europe. European integration, motivated by America, by the United States, the great motor for, the great engine for European integration was the United States. Against the principles of the Soviet Union, the great raison d'etre for European integration is emancipation, European emancipation. Why? Because the same level of political organization, states, sovereign states, that allowed Europe, this in the 20th century, laid Europe in this, prostrated Europe to this condition, the condition of being at the mercy of the two superpowers. Today's Europe is the Europe of the continent, and it is also the Europe of a plurality of territories that in the process of, like in rolling back from this condition that was the Europe in the 19th century, and the 19th century was not too long ago, to this condition, Europe managed to keep hold of a plurality of territories, particularly islands, that lay across the world's oceans. And this is why Europe still is Europe, the continent, as you can see in blue, what you can. But Europe also has a territorial border with Brazil, for example, because of French Guiana. That is Europe, as well as Europe is in the Pacific, in the South Atlantic, in the Indian Ocean, a bit throughout the world. And these are in Portuguese, I would say, resquícios, remnants, as if the debris that is left in the rolling back, as if it were left in the rolling back of Europe from its worldwide expansion to its continental circumstance. And what about us? What about Portugal? I will just give you brief ideas of the way Portugal emerged from a county, the Condado Portucalense, how immediately after Portugal, the conquest, the reconquest, Portugal became the rectangle, as you can see in this image, how immediately after Portugal turned south and to the west, blocked to the east by Castilla, by Spain, in order to expand, we had to go west, just as America went west. America went west because to the east was the ocean, and so it had the free hand of expansion into the west. So too did we. So too, with the case of Portugal, we too had our Western adventure, except that our Western adventure, instead of being with the carriages and the horseback and all of that celebrated by Hollywood, was on the ships and on the caravelas and on the naus and on the ships that brought Portugal first to the Azores and to Madeira, and then a bit to the world. This used to be Portugal. What you see in red this used to be this was at one point the map of Portugal. Just as this is, I like maps very much, and Dinesh asked me to talk about the Azores and Portugal and the European Union. Well, this used to be this is a map of Portugal from my youth. Portugal in my youth, not in the ancient times, not in the Middle Ages, but when I was a boy at school. Portugal is not a small country, and what is this? Is a map of the Portuguese territories mounted upon Europe, meaning giving the notion that if the entire Portuguese territories were in Europe, Portugal would be the size of Europe itself. Ego is something that we do not lack. Prolonging our frontiers all the way to Russia. Our Western adventure, our Western expansion was of the size that if it were Eastern, it would take us all the way to Russia. And should keep in mind, if it is only this, we owe it to our good English allies, because at one point our intention was to go even further than this. It was the English that denied us the territories that we wanted to claim that Portugal wanted to claim for itself in Africa between Angola and Mozambique. The famous or the infamous pink map delimiting the corrida por Africa, the scramble for Africa. This is the map that I showed you, and the islands. What about us? What about the Azores? What about our frontiers? Which frontiers for the Azores? Well, the image that I have in this slide is an image of a rock in the outskirts of the island of Flores, the westernmost island in the Azores, Monchique. I still recall visiting this place for the first time and having a Florentine, Mr. João Vieira, is now a very debilitated, very old man, still lucid, showed me the island, and with the same ease in which he showed me the villages, and in the villages the church and the museums and the soccer fields and the schools and everything else. Upon reaching this very spot, he pointed to this rock and he said, and that is America. To say that America is not something that is far away from our horizons, to the contrary, it's next door. It's as if it were next door. The Azores and the Azores, because during centuries of immigration, the Azores and the Azorians, we follow the route of the sun, going west, again going west, and going west, where first to Brazil, then to the United States, to Canada, to the New World, and to the New World because the old world was too closed, too small for us, and the new world was that which we had available for. Oops, why is this stopped? I have more slides, but the slides do not want to run. Here we go. And thus, which frontiers, which neighborhood? America. You do not need me to explain this image to you, of course. And this, why am I telling you this? Because Europe has a neighborhood policy. Europe has a neighborhood policy which fosters relations with one's neighbors. And one of my cavalos de batalha, how to say this in English, one of my major interests now is in my current position is precisely to underline this, that we have neighbors too. And that in spite of the fact that our neighbors are more than 50 miles distance, and therefore they are beyond the limit established by the Commission and by the Commission's bureaucrats for the definition of where one's neighborhood begins, we have a neighborhood too. And our neighborhood is in New England. Here they are, as well as in California, because this is where, just as Portugal, just as the Azores are the quintessence of Portugal, because the Azores were given shape and form by the Portuguese, so too our communities are as Azoreans, or if not more than we are, exactly for the very same reasons. Europe and its neighbors. Where are the neighbors? Who are the neighbors of Europe? Which communities? Well, we have the Azores have neighbors too. This is where they are. Madeira has neighbors too. The Canary Islands have neighbors too, and keep in mind these three, curiously enough, three autonomous communities. We will talk about, I would like to talk to you a little bit more about them in a while. I'm having problems with my computer because it is not allowing me to, here you go. The ocean, for us, the ocean does not enclose, it opens up. Historically, the ocean is not a frontier that blocks, a frontier that is closed. It is something that opens us, that gives us access, not to the east, but basically to the west. The saga of the saga of our diaspora, of where are the Azores and where are the Azoreans now. This is a very clear, very interesting map of the Azores. Territorially, the Azores are these minuscule points that you can see on the map. You'd see you need a magnifying glass to find it in the globe. Yet, as a community, in civilizational terms, the Azores are not these small points. These are the Azores, but are these. Why? Because this is the geostrategy of modernity that brought Portugal to open up to the world. This is also a very interesting slide that I like that underlines a very interesting point that I like to work on. I'm going to tell you a little bit, talk to you a little bit more later on about the Azores as an outermost region. We are an outermost region Europe knows a concept of peripheral regions, regions that are peripheral with relations to Brussels. And the Azores are not peripheral with relations to Brussels. We are an outermost region in the sense that we are more than peripheral to Brussels. Yet we are also central. And we are at the same time, and without contradiction, an outermost region and a central region. Central in this regard, and central because of you, and central because of you, because of the communities, because of our communities, and because of the global Atlantic dimension, the Western, Occidental, that you, in terms of civilizational dimension, that you entail to us. And that is why today I like to say, I like to ask about, even to our friends, about our largest cities. Our largest, Toronto is larger than Ponta Delgada, in the sense that it has more Azorians than Ponta Delgada has. Which are the largest Azorian cities? Well, they are not Ponta Delgada, Angra do Heroísmo, and or Ribeira Grande or Horta. These are our largest cities. And again, which neighborhood? The outermost regions, I will explain to you a little bit more what they are. They imprint a global projection to Europe and to the European Union. They imprint a global projection because they are what's left to Europe from that process of shrinking, of returning to its continental base. And the outermost regions, we are also laboratories of Europe. It was in these islands, in Madeira and in the Azores, that Portugal tried for the first time the mechanisms and the structures with which it was to occupy Angola, Mozambique, Brazil. These islands are laboratories in which Portugal, Spain, France, and the rest were able to test its policies and its mechanisms for world expansion in the past. Same is true today. The outermost regions are islands and territories that say yes to Europe and are fully European. Fully European, notwithstanding the fact that they are projected and dispersed across the globe. While Europe's states hold territories, islands and territories that say no to Europe, like Saint-Pierre and Miquelon at the entrance of the Hudson, in the mouth of Canada, a plurality of islands and territories that are not Europe, that do not, where the euro does not circulate, that do not apply European law, that whose citizens are not European citizens, and so forth, and so forth. From Europe, the outermost regions, these islands and territories, imprint upon Europe what is possible of this old universal vocation of the past. Europe's islands prolong. This is a very interesting picture. This is a picture of a place that is called Finisterre. The end of, not Finisterre, which in English is translated as the end of the world. This is the end of the world because this is the end of Europe, because Europe was the world. Well, what we represent is that Europe does not, the world, not only the world does not end there, Europe does not end there, but Europe knows a literally a worldwide projection. This is an official map of Europe. Europe and the EU, in the dark blue, still 28. Sorry, should have been chosen an updated map because of the UK. But see the worldwide projection. Europe and Europe and the system of international relations. My idea, my proposal to you is that organized in states, Europe was able to command the world. And in this task, Portugal was pioneer. And Portugal was pioneer not because the Portuguese are braver than anyone else. How was Portugal able to conquer Brazil, to conquer Angola, Mozambique? Because Portugal was a sovereign state. While those territories have no idea of sovereignty and no idea of the concentration of power that it allows, and have no notion and no capacity to act that could parallel the Portuguese, afterwards the Spaniards, the Dutch, the English, the French, and all of the rest. The notion is that this very, continuing in telegraphic fashion, is this very notion of sovereignty and of organizing ourselves in sovereign states, which allowed Europe to command the world in the 20th century, left Europe on the brink of disaster and at the mercy of Russians and North Americans. And that is why COVID, the renewed evidence of the fragility of our states and the need for a supranational political order. Just as after the Second World War, it became evident that the European states had no way of defending themselves. The first instance of European integration was a treaty of union between England and France, should Germany rearm and become again a menace to European order. But it immediately became evident that the threat did not come from Germany to European security, but from Russia, and that Germany was not a menace, a threat. Germany was not part of the problem. Germany had to be part of the solution. A professor of mine at Fletcher, talking about the founding fathers of the European Union, once referred to us the notion that we had in Europe, we had our founding fathers too. But what we called holy founding fathers and unholy founding fathers, both at least equally important for the process of European integration. And amongst the holy founding fathers, well, you can find Cannon, Marshall, you can alongside with Jean Monnet, Schuman, and all the rest. And among the unholy founding fathers, Stalin stands out. Stalin is perhaps the greatest founding father of the greatest founding father of European integration, because he is the greatest responsible for the need for European integration. International system from bipolarity to unipolarity and the contemporary challenges, the challenges of Europe finding a place, emancipating itself and finding a place for itself. Thus, the renewed values of the islands of Europe in the contemporary world, in the contemporary struggle for power, because they represent as many instruments for the European Union to act upon. Europe was first a matter of a continental affair, a matter of states, dealing with state issues and with states affairs. Immediately after, there emerged a notion of Europe of the regions, Europe with the regions, of a place for the regions in the process of building Europe. So much so that in 1973, at the first enlargement of the EU to the United Kingdom, to Ireland, and to Denmark, the regions that were autonomous, that were able to have a say on the matter, said no to Europe. Which reasons were these? The Channel Islands in the UK, the Isle of Man, the Faroe Islands, Iceland, which by the time was also in the independent, the Danish islands said no to Europe and remained outside of Europe. By the second enlargement to Greece, curiously enough, Greece being an insular state brought no insular interests to the EU. We have to wait for 1986 and for the accession of Portugal and Spain for these issues to be on the table. And why? Because of the Portuguese constitution and this right to participate in international affairs. A right which led the Commission, curiously enough, it was the European Commission that reminded the Portuguese state that the Azores and Madeira were autonomous regions and therefore had to be party to the negotiations in order to assure that they would not say no and instead say yes to Europe. Why? The interest of the Commission? One has but to look at the map to see what these islands bring to Europe. And so at that time, during the negotiations of accession, for the first time, the Union was able to adopt a very specific policy. And the very specific policy is this: European integration is grounded on the principle of replacement, different national policies for a single policy. Instead of Portugal, Spain, Italy, each one having its agricultural policy, all will have a single common policy. Or with COVID, instead of Portugal, Italy, and Spain, each negotiating with the pharmaceuticals for the purchases of the vaccines, it is the Commission that negotiates it and distributes the vaccines throughout entire Europe. Replacing is the logic of the replacement of national policies for a single common policy. Well, with our case, it was the request, the necessity to do the contrary, to replace a single policy for differentiated policies. Why? Because the Azores and Madeira had special characteristics, special requirements that required justice, requires treating. The classics tell us that justice requires the treatment of equals equally. But the treatment of those who are of different circumstances equally does not lead to equality, but to inequality. Thus, the need for differentiated treatment, for the negotiation of special measures. And one of the greatest innovations was the recognition in the Treaty of Accession, in a declaration attached to the treaty, that the Azores and Madeira required, because of their difficulties in lack of natural resources, of basic infrastructures, backwardness in terms of socioeconomic development and so forth, required special attention. Not the same attention that the rest of the country did or the rest of Europe, but differentiated attention, special attention and special treatment. This is what led to the famous POSE programs, Program of Specific Options, for the Azores and for Madeira, for the Canary Islands. The Canary Islands at one point originally chose partial integration to stay 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the EU, witnessing the success story in which full integration was translating for the Azores and for Madeira. The regions started receiving European assistance even before accession. quickly changed gears and chose full accession so as to profit from the same mechanisms. The Azores, Madeira, the Canary Islands, and the same of some of the array of French islands and territories. And I say the array because there are over 24 of such territories scattered around the planet. The French have basically two types of regions. The outermost regions that are European, fully European, where I can travel to with my ID card. I do not need a passport, don't even need a passport, where European law applies, and where they vote and they are eligible for European Parliament alongside their French countrymen. And they have the overseas territories, which have differentiated treatment, to which I need a passport, that are not fully European citizens, and so forth. The outermost regions are these set of regions: the Portuguese, Spanish, French, the French of the French, those that chose to be fully integrated, and these are the outermost regions. The outermost regions are Reunion Island and Mayotte in the Indian Ocean, are Guyana, which is the only one that is not an island. It's a territorial enclave in South America. Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint-Martin. Saint-Martin is not an island also, it's half an island, imagine, because of, again, property. Property, half the island is the property of France, the other half is the property of the Netherlands. A very small island, but it's not divided in two. The Madeira and the Azores. These islands, this set of islands, this stand out as a very specific territory of the EU because of their difficult topography, of their insularity, of their remoteness, of their small size, of their specific climate, on their economic dependency on these characteristics that are recognized and inscribed upon the treaty, and which require special policies and special programs. Who are this in the treaty? This is not correct. Saint-Barthélemy, in the process, chose to leave the set because it chose not to be submitted to the full range of European legislation, of EU law, of EU regulation. To do that, it had to be partial out. And so Saint-Barthélemy is French, it's not European. Just as in the beginning, Algiers was French, but was not European. It was not European, was not part of the European Economic Community. The outermost regions form a unity that organizes itself around what informally in what is called the Conference of Presidents of the outermost regions. Upon taking office, I inherited taking care of the Azorian presidency. And so it was a baptism of fire, so to speak. It was entering one day and the next day having my colleagues call me and what are the priorities of the Azorian presidency? What is the program for the Azorian presidency? What does the Azorian presidency think of this or of that? These are what was elected as major priorities for the current year. And the notion is that we have a committee. We form a committee that meets regularly, regularly means twice a month. This is a very confederal. If you think in American terms, I would explain this as a very confederal entity made up of representatives of each of the outermost regions that attempts to reach consensus on what our common interests and in the lobbying of the European institutions. I'm coming to an end. I do not mean to massacre you for much further. The outermost regions, the EU requires the privileges cooperation amongst us and privileges cooperations with our neighbors, and organizes us in three clusters: Indian, Caribbean, Atlantic, promoting the cooperation with neighboring states, also serving as a way of assistance to development. That is why the program for cooperation of the outermost regions is the only one that did not knew any cuts following the UK leaving the Union, and the UK was a major contributor to the Union. Well, the point of the matter is that when it's organized in these clusters, what about we, the Azores, are in the MAC space. MAC is the Macaronesia space, the blessed islands of the ancient, constituted of the Azores, Madeira, and the Canary Islands. Madeira, Azores, Canary Islands, the MAC space. Who are our neighbors? Recognized in the treaties, our neighbors are at the moment Senegal, Mauritania, and Cape Verde. And there is a motion to enlarge this set to Ghana, Gambia, the Ivory Coast, and from following our proposal, the archipelago of Saint Thomas and Principe. My notion is, ending as I began, is that the US is also our neighbor. And just as Interreg, the formal European program for cooperation among the outermost regions and for cooperation with neighbors, the same way that Interreg allows for cooperation with Senegal, Mauritania, and Cape Verde, it makes absolutely no sense that it should continue to not allow for cooperation with our communities, which are as Azorians as we are. And there is hope. I've been in office been sitting there for literally two and a half months. The day before yesterday, I had a meeting with the Commission where the European Commission generously considered the possibility of having for Interreg entities from the United States count as stakeholders, not as partners. They cannot be partners of ours, but can be stakeholders, and therefore beginning to be involved with us. This is my final slide, and with this, my notion that it is a priority. It is a priority to involve the communities in the construction of the contemporary Azores at the European level, at the national level, at the regional level. At the regional level, one of the notions that I'm toying with is the revision of our legislative assembly. We have a very peculiar legislative assembly, which is because our legislative assembly is one chamber made up in one chamber, as if, as in America, you would combine the the House and the Senate in one single chamber. This is what we have. And my proposal is that we should branch our regional legislative assembly and in upper and lower house, and in the upper house of territorial representation. This upper house should be representative of the islands and of the diaspora, and the diaspora, of course. It is important because it is from this space that our direct future ensues. It's from the East, from the European Union, of course, but also from the West. Thus the idea of centrality. Periphery, outermost, with relation to one side of our space of integration, the European Union. Centrality with regard to the civilizational space. Of course, we're not going to be politically part of the United States. There were, in the 19th century, in the early part of the 20th century, there were projects. A lot of people toyed with the notion and looked at, there were people, I have found proposals of looking at Puerto Rico and reivindications of a similar status for the Azores to that of Puerto Rico. That's not the point. That's not the question. It's not the question of being politically a part of the United States. Politically, we are Portuguese. Politically, here we are Portuguese. Politically, we are part of the EU. Civilizationally, at the part of the Atlantic community. Centrality. And centrality because in the very center, in the very middle of these two poles. Hope that this made any sense, that this was of interest. And of course, I am fully available to continue dialogue on these telegrams that I presented to you in extremely sketchy shape, both here and now, and afterwards, particularly if Professor Diniz Borges fulfills and comes through with his original proposal. Thank you very much.
It will come through for sure. I don't know if you can stop sharing your screen, Professor Carlos Amaral, yes, so we can see your face a little bit more. We have one question that I'd like to pose to you. There we go. We can see you now. Perfect. We have actually a comment and a question, and it's from a colleague, Professor Duarte Silva, born in the beautiful island of São Jorge, and who is a professor emeritus now. He's too young to be emeritus, but he is professor emeritus from Stanford University. And Duarte puts this forth. First of all, he wants to thank you for a most informative and engaging lecture. And his question is, how should Portugal and its autonomous regions, the Azores and Madeira, leverage its noble history, entrepreneurial and adventurous spirit, and its strategic geopolitical position to address the major challenges, realities, and global issues of the 21st century? While the challenges are different, they don't appear to be any more challenging than those our pioneers faced in earlier times.
Well, I thank you very much, dear colleague, for the challenge. Unfortunately, I, of course, do not have an answer for you. And if I had, I would not be here. I would certainly not be here. How to address the major challenges? The major notion is that the contemporary world, my major notion, is that the contemporary world requires more and different from what the modern world required. The modern world required statehood, sovereign statehood. Statehood in our terms, in European terms. And statehood in European terms meant full concentration of power in a single pair of hands, and each state catering for its interests. Thus the idea of balance of power. And the idea of balance of power is the idea of going as far as the power that each one commands allows him, what the power that each one commands allows him to do, allows him to take hand of, allows to conquer, so for his own services. The notion of a planet that is divided between citizens and foreigners, this notion has no place in the contemporary world, because what the contemporary world underlines, to my mind, is pretty much the materialization of the old dream of the classics, of the house as a cosmos, and the cosmos as a common house, of the world not as that which belongs to me and which belongs to you, but that which is common to us all. What is common to us all of the world is a common house of the men and of the gods, as the ancients would say. What of us? What of us of the islands of our and of our challenges? What we are an added value. We are a precious added value to Europe because we are outposts. We are outposts that allow Europe and the Atlantic community to project its message and we are outputs, we are showcases of Europe, the islands, the Azores, just as we were at the dawn of our 500 years story. We were important at the time because these islands were able to furnish fresh water and fruit to the ships, because these islands were able to produce wheat for the fortresses in North Africa, because these islands were able to produce coal for the ships for the refueling of the ships, or these islands were to produce combustion fuel for the airplanes, that crossed the Atlantic, and to hunt the U-boats that were a threat in the planet, that were a threat to the navigation. Today, it's the same. These islands are these islands are precious laboratories for climate change, for the research in climate change, energy, for clean energies, for the circular economy. These islands for the interconnection of the world, of the ambassadors across, and the dialogue across civilizations, because our destinies are meshed together, are intricately connected and dependent upon each other. In the 19th century, throughout the 20th century, what happened in abroad was abroad. I still remember, Monsieur Lapalisse would not say it better, of course, I still remember first time I went to the States after finishing high school here, and in the airplane, I was given a form for an alien. That's what I was, an alien, an ET. That's what foreigners are to citizens. ETs, aliens. And that is what the people are, aliens, and the goods and the economic infrastructure and so forth are aliens as well. They are objects. Challenge, the major challenge we need to address is that this is no longer the case. It's not possible. It's not possible because when the Amazon forest burns, it's not just the Brazilians that suffer, we all suffer. Well, just as when the volcano in Iceland erupted, it was not air travel in Iceland that was affected, it was air traffic across the planet. Or COVID It's not possible to fight COVID in Portugal, independently of how the circumstance unfolds in Spain and in Italy and in the rest of the continent and in the rest of Europe. The major challenge lies in the, put to my mind, in the political reconfiguration of the way in which we organize ourselves. And the added value, what added value of these islands? The greatest added value of these islands lie precisely in their historical vocation to constitute bridges. It's the Azores, but it's also Madeira. But it's talking to my friends from the Canary Islands, I hear exactly the same narrative. And this is also what I found. I found this in the Caribbean. I found this in the Indian Ocean. I found this in Reunion Island. The major, what should Portugal? Portugal as a state has come a tremendous way. I remember a time when we were but objects, when the Azores were but objects. There were adjacent islands, as ilhas adjacentes. I remember a time when we were but objects to the service of the Portuguese state. Regional autonomy means that we are an end in ourselves, and that we are not valuable only because of the services that we render to Lisbon. We are a value because of ourselves, and because of the services that we render to the planet and to the human condition. To put in a caricature, I remember a time when the TV, or even before TV, when the radio, it was important to give the time, to see what time it was. And the time was Lisbon time, and nothing but Lisbon time. The difference today is that you will never find just Lisbon time, you'll find Lisbon time and Azorian time. And you will find even at election, when the polls close earlier in Lisbon than here, but projections and so forth, they are not presented before they close here. It's a question of dignity, of recognition of the dignity of the islander and of the value of the islander in her and himself. And the major challenge, from my perspective, is this recognition. And I believe that the Portuguese authorities and the European authorities have started to recognize this. And they have started to recognize this exactly to assure that we will never say no, as the other islands did, or as Catalonia is in a state of war in doing, and so forth. Hope that this began to address the issue.
Certainly did. And we had promised you 1 hour. We are about 1 hour and 15 minutes. I apologize, but and I know you have
no problem.
Many other commitments. Some of our students had to leave as well just recently because they have another class, although it's Zoom, but they have to go from class to class. And I wanted to basically, of course, we just wanted to end. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Professor Carlos Amaral. The promise is to be kept for various reasons. First of all, because we have an ongoing exchange program with the University of the Azores with the Terceira campus, more in the field of agriculture, but that's very important, of course, as you know, to the region. It's very important to the Portuguese Americans in this part of the world. It is something that we have some know-how here, and I think it's we can continue doing this for a very long time. We have also partnered with, as Professor Carlos Amaral knows, with the a program that he started before he went into government, which is very, very interesting in the aspect of bringing the Azores and the communities together, the American Corner Project. And we want to congratulate him for that. And we want to thank him for having Fresno State being part of it. And from a political aspect, let me also mention one thing, and that is something that we are working on, not PBBI at Fresno State, but something that I'm involved in as president of the board of directors of the California Portuguese American Coalition. Another reason for you to come in the springtime of 2022, which is we are in the works with the California State Assembly of putting forth a caucus called Friends of the Azores Caucus. So a caucus that will exist in the state of California at the assembly level and at the Senate level, that its main purpose is to have a better working relationship with the Azores, directly between California as a state and the Azores as an autonomous region. It is being co-sponsored by two Portuguese Americans, one in the Senate, one in the state, in the assembly, and we hope that by spring of 2022, we can have the Friends of the Azores Caucus in place, and we'd love to have your presence there. I know the Assembly would like to have that as well. So we have a lot of things to work on.
Thank you very much again, and let me tell you, please allow me two brief notes.
Sure.
Dropping my hat as professor at the University of the Azores and putting on my hat as regional director. As regional director, responsible for external cooperation, please be assured of my great interest in this notion of a caucus at the legislative level in California. Of course, that most probably the privileged partner will be the regional assembly and not the executive. But should I be of assistance, you just say the word, and I would of course be delighted to be a part in this kind of work. The other notion is that I still wait for confirmation from the European Commission, that is this notion of Interreg. This program of Interreg, of inter-regional cooperation amongst the outermost regions of the Azores, Madeira, and the Canary Islands, and their neighbors. And this is not strictly academic, this is concrete. And to start, we are trying to have the Commission approve the integration into joint projects of entities from your side, where expenses incurred, expenses made in the United States are not eligible. Expenses made in the Azores or in the Canary Islands or in Madeira are eligible for financing from the European Union. So this could be a very important instrument for the promotion of cooperation at a plurality of levels, not just at the academic level, but at the agricultural level, at the level of energy, of research, of transportation, you name it. It's just a question of shaping a project with the appropriate regional institutions.
Indeed. Lots of work to be done. We have lots of things that we, as you know, even from the municipal level, we have these wonderful sister city programs that we need to revitalize them even more, because they're very important, from that people-to-people program that Eisenhower once dreamed, and lots of different work. Thank you so much, Professor Carlos Amaral. It was enlightening, as always. Great seeing you. Take care, and we'll see you at the American Corner, and we'll see you live here in Fresno in 2022.
And you know, when I was a boy, I'm sure you have similar experience. When I was a boy, the elderly, they would not say goodbye. Nobody said goodbye. They would say, Haja saúde.
That's right. Haja saúde.
May you stay healthy. May there be health. Never has this greeting been more appropriate than in today's pandemic days? So please, my friends, haja saúde.
Haja saúde. Thank you so much. Muito obrigado.